Look up on a clear winter night and find the small knot of stars that rides the shoulder of Taurus. Almost every people who ever lived has named them. They called them seven sisters, even though only six can be counted. They wrote them into their oldest songs, into their sacred caves, into their stories about where we came from. Tonight, we follow that single question across 4 continents and down into the atoms inside your own hand. Why do we keep looking up and feeling that we are far from home? Of all the lights in the night sky, this little cluster is one of the easiest to miss and the hardest to forget. It is faint, it is small, you could cover it with your thumb held at arm's length, and yet, for as long as there have been people to look upward, this tiny smudge of blue stars has carried more stories than almost any other object in the heavens. Here is the first strange thing. Count the stars with your naked eye on a dark night far from any city. Most people, even people with very good vision, see 6. And yet, across the entire world, in cultures that never met, never traded, never shared a single word of language, these stars are almost always called the same thing. 7 sisters, 7 maidens, 7 little girls. In ancient Greece, the Pleiades were the 7 daughters of the Titan Atlas. Atlas had been condemned to hold up the sky forever, which meant he could not protect his children. When the hunter Orion began to pursue them across the land, the great god Zeus took pity and lifted the sisters into the heavens as stars. But there is a detail in the Greek story that should make the hair on your arm stand up. The Greeks said that one of the 7 sisters fell in love with a mortal man and hid herself away in shame. That, they explained, is why we now see only 6. Now travel to the other side of the planet. Travel to Australia, to cultures whose ancestors had been separated from the people of Europe for an almost unimaginable stretch of time. In many Aboriginal traditions, the Pleiades are also a group of young women, and in many of those traditions, those women are also being chased by a man, a hunter, who is the constellation we call Orion. The same 7 sisters, the same pursuer, the same sky. Stop and let that settle. 2 peoples on opposite ends of the earth who had no contact for tens of thousands of years. Both look up at the same faint cluster and both tell the story of 7 sisters fleeing a hunter. How is that possible? For a long time, the easy answer was simple coincidence, or that Europeans carried the tale to Australia after they arrived a little more than 2 centuries ago. But the astrophysicist Ray Norris, who spent years learning sky stories from indigenous Australians, did not believe that. The story is woven too deeply into too many separate and distant cultures to have spread in only 200 years. So Norris and his son Barnaby went looking for a different answer, and they found it written in the motion of the stars themselves. We think of the stars as fixed. They are not. Every star in the sky is racing through space, and they are not all moving together. Astronomers call this proper motion. Using precise measurements from the Gaia Space Telescope, the Norrises looked at 2 stars inside the Pleiades, named Atlas and Pleione. Today, these 2 sit so close together that, to the naked eye, they blur into a single point of light. That is part of why we count only 6. But the stars are drifting. So the Norrises did something remarkable. They ran the clock backward. They rewound the positions of those stars across thousands and thousands of years, and they found that roughly 100,000 years ago, Pleione sat noticeably farther from Atlas, far enough that a person standing under a dark sky would have seen them clearly as 2 separate stars. Far enough that, at that time, the cluster would have shown not 6 stars, but 7. Now follow the thread to its end. 100,000 years ago is, by many estimates, around the time the ancestors of all of us still lived together, before the long migrations carried humanity out of Africa and into every corner of the earth. And so Norris asks a quiet, staggering question. What if the story of the 7 sisters is that old? What if our ancestors looked up, saw 7 stars, named them 7 sisters fleeing a hunter, and then carried that story in their mouths and their memories as they walked into Europe, into Asia, into Australia? What if they kept telling it, generation after generation, for 100,000 years, long after the 7th star had quietly slipped behind the 6th? It is a hypothesis, not a proven fact, and the exact timing of those first migrations is still debated by scientists. But if Norris is right, then this little cluster of stars holds the oldest story we've ever told. Older than writing, older than agriculture, older than the cave paintings, a story that has survived the entire history of our species, passed from voice to voice around fire after fire after fire for 100,000 years, and it would mean something tender and almost unbearable. The night you walk outside and look up at the Seven Sisters, you are not just seeing stars. You are completing a sentence that one of your distant grandmothers began before our species had ever left its first home. If the Pleiades are humanity's oldest story, then our next stop is humanity's most seductive one. Because there is a place where the human longing to be touched by the stars hardened into something that looked, for a while, like proof. In the cliffs and plains of Mali in West Africa live the Dogon people. They are farmers and weavers and keepers of an old and intricate spiritual world. And in the 1930s and 40s, two French anthropologists, Marcel Griaule and Germaine Dieterlen, came to live among them and to record their beliefs. What Griaule reported sent a shock through the 20th century. He wrote that initiated Dogon elders spoke of a sky being from the star we call Sirius. They called these beings the Namo and described them as part fish, part human creatures who came down from the heavens and taught the first people the foundations of civilization. That alone would be a beautiful myth. But Griaule reported something far stranger. He wrote that the Dogon knew Sirius was not one star, but two, that circling the great bright Sirius was a tiny companion star, which they called the Seed, or Pio Tolo. They described it, he said, as the smallest object in the sky and also the heaviest. And they said it took about 50 years to complete one orbit. Now here is why that froze people in their tracks. Sirius does have a companion. It is called Sirius B. It is completely invisible to the naked eye. It was only confirmed by telescope in the 1860s and only understood decades later to be a white dwarf, an incredibly dense, collapsed star, a tiny thing that is indeed almost unimaginably heavy. And its orbit around Sirius takes about 50 years. How could a people with no telescopes possibly know about an invisible star and describe it as small, heavy, and circling on a 50-year path? In 1976, a writer named Robert Temple gathered these claims into a famous book called The Sirius Mystery. His answer was bold. The Dogon, he argued, were remembering a real visit, contact with intelligent beings from the Sirius system, knowledge handed down across thousands of years. It became one of the most cited pieces of so-called evidence that we were taught by visitors from the stars. It is a thrilling story, and we owe it to ourselves and to the Dogon to look at it honestly, because that's where the mystery takes a turn. In 1991, an anthropologist named Walter van Beek did something no one had done in the decades since Griaule. He went back. Van Beek and a team of researchers lived among the Dogon for years, specifically hoping to find this astonishing star knowledge for themselves. Griaule had suggested that a meaningful share of Dogon men were initiated into this lore, so finding it again should have been straightforward. They found nothing of the kind. Across village after village, season after season, Van Beek could not locate the detailed Sirius teaching that Griaule had described. Yes, the Dogon spoke of a star tied to an important festival, but they did not agree among themselves about which star it even was. Some pointed to one thing, some to another. There was no shared secret knowledge of an invisible companion. The clean, perfect picture in the book simply was not there in the field. So what happened? The most grounded explanation is also the most human. The Dogon did not live sealed away from the world. In 1893, a French astronomical expedition spent weeks in their region to observe an eclipse. By the early 20th century, the discovery of Sirius B was printed in popular astronomy books. Information about that companion star was simply in the air. It could have drifted into Dogon conversation and folded gently into their existing sky stories long before Griaule arrived to write it down. And Griaule himself had trained in astronomy. Some scholars suspect that his own questions, asked with great enthusiasm and great expectation, may have shaped the answers he received. It is only fair to say this remains debated. Grial's own daughter, herself a respected scholar, argued that Van Beek never reached the deepest, most protected layers of Dogon knowledge. That tension has never been fully resolved. But the lesson underneath the argument is the real treasure of this segment, and it is one to carry into everything that follows. When a story flatters our deepest wish, the wish that we are special, that we were chosen, that someone came down from the stars just for us, we should slow down. We should look twice, not because wonder is foolish, but because wonder is precious, and it deserves to be spent on what is actually true. That same wish, the wish to find the visitors and the evidence, takes us next to a quiet drawer in a museum in Istanbul. In the far east of modern Turkey, near the shores of Lake Van, there once stood a powerful kingdom called Urartu. Its capital was a city named Tushpa, perched on a great fortress rock. The Urartians were real, and they were impressive. They were master metal workers, builders of canals and citadels, makers of beautiful bronze. Their kingdom flourished roughly 2,700 years ago, and then faded into history. At the site of Toprakkale, where Tushpa once stood, a small carved object is said to have surfaced. And when the writer Zecharia Sitchin, the great popularizer of the ancient astronaut idea, tracked it down in the Istanbul Archaeology Museum, he believed he was looking at something impossible. To Sitchin, it looked like a rocket, a small sculpted craft about the length of a hand with a pointed nose. At the back, he counted what looked like a cluster of engines, 4 smaller ones surrounding a larger central one. And seated inside, knees drawn up to the chest, was a single figure, a pilot, wrapped in what Sitchin described as a ribbed pressure suit that ran down into boots. A cone-nosed ship, exhaust engines, a suited pilot, carved, supposedly, by a people who lived almost 3,000 years ago. If it were real, it would be one of the most extraordinary objects on Earth. And for years, it has circulated through documentaries and websites as exactly that, the ancient space shuttle of Istanbul. So let us do what we did with the Dogon. Let us look closely and calmly, start with the most important fact, and it is one the believers tend to skip past. The museum did not put this object on proud display, they kept it in storage. The reason is not a cover-up. The reason is that the curators doubted it from the start. It did not match the known style of Urartian art at all. The Urartians left behind a rich body of work, and none of it looks remotely like this. So, the museum did the responsible thing. They had the object examined, and the analysis did not find ancient stone. According to the accounts of that testing, the material was consistent with modern plaster, an object made not thousands of years ago, but within living memory. In other words, the most likely story of the Istanbul space shuttle is not a tale of visitors from the sky. It is a tale of a modern fake that found its way into a museum drawer and then found a second life as a legend. Now, why does an object like this fool the eye so completely? The answer is a quirk of the human mind called pareidolia. We are pattern-finding animals. We see faces in clouds and animals in the stars. And crucially, we can only recognize what we already know. You and I look at a cone with fins and a seated figure and instantly think rocket because we have spent our whole lives surrounded by rockets. A person 3,000 years ago had no such picture in their head. The rocket is not in the stone. The rocket is in us. We carry the space age in our eyes, and then we are surprised to find it staring back at us from the past. This does not make the ancient world less wonderful. It makes it more wonderful. The Urartians did not need to be handed technology from the stars. With their own hands and their own minds, beside a lake in the mountains, they raised fortresses and cut canals and poured bronze into breathtaking shapes. The real marvel was never the visitors we imagined. The real marvel was always them. So far we have looked outward at stars and tribes and artifacts. Now we turn the telescope around and point it at a feeling, because there is a belief alive in the world right now, today, that says some of us are not originally from this planet at all. They are called starseeds, and if you have never heard the word, you have almost certainly met the feeling behind it. People who identify as starseeds describe a sense, often reaching back to childhood, that they do not quite belong here, that Earth is not really home, that their true origin lies somewhere out among the stars, and that they have come here into a human life with some kind of purpose to help, to heal, to awaken something. Many of them point to particular places in the sky as their point of origin. And again, one of the places they name is the Pleiades, the Seven Sisters, the very same cluster that opened this journey. It would be easy to be dismissive here, and that would be a mistake. Because whatever you believe about its literal truth, the starseed feeling is pointing at something real and very old in the human heart. It is the feeling of being a stranger in your own life. The ache of looking up at a dark sky and sensing without words that you are connected to it. The quiet conviction that you are meant for something larger than the small life around you. That feeling did not begin with the modern New Age movement. It is the same feeling that made the Greeks place their heroes in the constellations. The same feeling that made cultures everywhere imagine that the dead become stars. The same feeling that sat behind every ancestor who ever looked up and wondered whether the lights were watching back. The starseed is simply the newest name for one of the oldest human experiences, the suspicion that we came from up there. Now, as a claim about your literal biography, there is no evidence that any human soul was born around another star and shipped to Earth. That belongs to faith and personal meaning, not to science, and it is worth being clear and gentle about that line. But hold on to the feeling itself, because we are about to discover something extraordinary. The starseeds say their home is in the stars. The Greeks said their sisters were lifted into the stars. The Dogon dreamed of teachers from a star. Across every story in this film runs the same thread, the same intuition, surfacing again and again in people who never met. We belong to the sky. We came from the sky. What if that intuition is not a delusion at all? What if it is a memory of something perfectly, literally true? A truth so deep that our ancestors could feel it long before anyone could measure it? Keep that question open. We are almost ready to answer it. But first, one more journey. Back to Australia, to one of the oldest living cultures on the face of the earth. In the rugged Kimberley region of northwestern Australia, on rock walls and inside caves, there are paintings of beings called the Wandajina. They are guarded and maintained by the Warora, the Ngarnian, and the Wunambal peoples, whose connection to this land reaches back tens of thousands of years. And the moment you see a Wandajina, something in you reacts. The faces are pale, almost white. They have large, dark, round eyes. They have no mouth. And around each head is a great halo, a band that radiates outward like a crown, or to modern eyes like a helmet. It is not hard to guess what some people did with that image. They looked at the white face, the huge black eyes, the mouthless stare, the helmet, and they saw the stereotype of an alien, the very picture our films and our imaginations have burned into us. And so the Wandjina were swept up into the ancient astronaut story, presented as proof that sky visitors had been painted by people who saw them with their own eyes. And it is true that the Wandjina are sky beings. In the dreaming, the great creation reality of these cultures, the Wandjina came down from the clouds in the Milky Way. They shaped the land, they made the laws, they created the people. Then they laid themselves down into the rock and the water holes, and there they remain. Some, it is said, return to the sky and can be seen moving among the stars. So once again, we have the same haunting pattern, beings from the sky who made us and then departed. But now listen to what the Wandjina actually are to the people who hold them sacred, because this is where projecting our alien story onto them becomes not just wrong, but a kind of theft. The Wandjina are not astronauts. They are spirits of cloud and rain and storm. In a land shaped by the brutal rhythm of drought and monsoon, the Wandjina are the bringers of the rain that mean the difference between life and death. The radiating halo around the head is not a space helmet. It represents lightning and clouds and feathers and the storm itself. The dark eyes have been linked to the eye of a thunderstorm. The fine markings on the body represent falling rain. And the strange, mouthless face has a meaning of its own. The custodians explain that the Wandjina are given no mouth because they are so powerful they have no need of speech, and because, it is said, if they were painted with mouths, the rain would never stop falling. These are not the fading relics of a dead religion, they are living law. For generations, initiated artists have carefully repainted these images, refreshing the figures so that their power stays alive and the rains keep coming. The painting is a ceremony, the rock is a sacred place. The Wandjina connect the people to their ancestors, to their country, and to the forces of nature that sustain them. And so the people of the Kimberley have asked, with real pain, to have their sky beings back, to stop seeing their most sacred ancestors flattened into little gray aliens from a film. Because when we glance at someone else's holy art and announce that it must be aliens, we are not honoring a mystery. We are erasing a meaning. We are so eager to find the stars in their paintings that we miss the storm, the law, the rain, and the deep human genius that is actually there. The lesson of the Wandjina is the gentlest and the sharpest of all. Sometimes the sky beings are real, just not in the way we wanted. They live in the clouds, in the law, and in the unbroken memory of a people who have watched that sky for longer than almost anyone else alive. We have crossed the world. We have weighed the seven sisters, the fish gods of Sirius, the rocket in the drawer, the longing of the star seeds, and the rain spirits of the Kimberley. And through every one of them ran a single thread, an intuition that humanity simply cannot shake, that we came from the stars, that we belong to the sky, that we are not, in some deep way, from here. So let us finally ask the real question, is any of it true? And the answer, when it comes, is more astonishing than any space shuttle and more intimate than any visitation. Yes, we are not originally from Earth, and we can prove it, not with a carved rocket or a secret myth, but with the atoms inside your own body, right now, as you breathe. To see it, we have to go back to the very beginning. When the universe was born, it made almost nothing. In the first minutes after the Big Bang, there was hydrogen, a great deal of helium, and a trace of lithium. That was the entire shopping list of creation. No carbon, no oxygen, no nitrogen, no iron. None of the ingredients of a living thing existed anywhere in the cosmos. The early universe could not have built you. The atoms were not there yet. So where did they come from? They were forged inside stars. A star is a furnace of unimaginable heat and pressure. Deep in its core, it crushes hydrogen into helium, and that fusion is what makes it shine. As a star ages and runs low on fuel, it presses harder and begins to fuse heavier and heavier elements. Helium into carbon, carbon into oxygen, on through neon and magnesium and silicon, all the way up to iron. Every one of those elements, the carbon in your cells, the oxygen filling your lungs, the nitrogen in your DNA, was cooked in the heart of a star. But the star is not finished teaching us. When a truly massive star reaches the end, when its core is turned to iron and can burn no more, it collapses and detonates in a supernova, one of the most violent events in all of nature. And in that explosion, and in the collisions of dead stars, even heavier elements are born and flung screaming across space. The calcium that hardens your bones, the iron that reddens your blood, the phosphorus laced through the spiral of your DNA. All of it was scattered into the dark by dying stars. Then, across millions of years, those scattered ashes drifted together. They gathered into clouds. The clouds collapsed into new stars, and the leftovers formed planets, and one of those planets was the Earth, built out of the dust of stars that had already lived and died. And from that dust, in time, came oceans and life and forests and you. This is the real evidence hidden behind the seven sisters. The carbon in your DNA was made in a star. The oxygen you were breathing as you watched this was made in a star. The iron in the blood moving through your heart was made in a star and probably blasted into space by a supernova before the Earth even existed. You are not a creature that lives beneath the stars. You are a creature made of them. The astronomer, Carl Sagan, said it most simply. We are made of star stuff. He did not mean it as poetry. He meant it as chemistry. It is one of the most rigorously established facts in all of science. So look again at everything we've seen tonight. The starseeds who feel they came from the stars are touching, in their own language, a literal truth about the origin of their atoms. The ancestors who lifted their sisters into the sky were honoring a kinship that was real. The peoples who said we descended from sky beings were not entirely wrong. We did descend from the sky. We descended as the dust of exploded stars, gathered into living, thinking, remembering beings who are now able to look back up at the furnace that made them and finally understand. And that little cluster of stars where we began, the Pleiades, the seven sisters our species has watched for perhaps 100,000 years, they are not strangers, they are kin. They are made of the same elements you are. When you stand under a winter sky and feel that old, wordless pull toward those 6 visible lights, you are not imagining a connection. You are recognizing your family. We spent this whole journey looking for visitors from the stars. We never needed them, because the most extraordinary fact was true all along, and it was never out there. It was in here. The universe spent billions of years in the lives and deaths of countless stars, learning how to become something that could look up and wonder where it came from. That something is you. You are the universe, awake, looking at itself and remembering home.